Oh, yes. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood ministration. You need only unravel its mystery.
And what a mystery it is. One filled with intrigue, murder, evolution, and monsters. And to help make sense of it, I've drafted the experts. SinclairLore.
Hi!
Richard Pillbeam, JSF.
Hello.
I was like, is it JSK? Is it JSF? No, it's JSF.
It's not any of that. I don't use that name. That's a relic from 2015 that I'm unable to shed.
Oh. You guys have been a tremendous help while I put together my Bloodborne commentary, and I thought we should do something special together. So we're just gonna do the basic lore of Bloodborne. The story from beginning to end. Does that sound good?
Let's see.
Now, this is maybe not a part of the actual video. This is not the Snack Covenant. I expect a certain level of professionalism. Okay, I thought that was funny.
Well, what Aesir doesn't know is that when other people edit the podcasts, I am mostly professional.
Oh.
Sin tends to behave herself when she's not in charge.
Okay. I thought it was a funny joke. Anyways, so...
I guess you're not that funny.
I'm gonna take that reaction from Richie right now, and I'm gonna edit that as the reaction to my joke. I thought we should just look at, first of all, like the ancient world, basically the old Sumerian stuff, just
Right.
like the background of the universe. The world before the story, so that's more Bergenworth, what exactly is happening there. What's going on in the world right now as we play through the game. That's the choir in Menses. What are we doing? And then what happens next? That's more just like the ramifications of everything, rather than speculation. So, the ancient world, do we know what is the earliest part of the world of Bloodborne?
Well, that's the thing, because we actually don't. One of the things about Bloodborne that is distinct from the Dark Souls games is that, like, they both do there are successive ages things in the way that Dark Souls, there was the Age of Ancients, and the Age of Fire, and the Age of the Deep, and things like that. Bloodborne is superficially similar in that we have all of these different sort of periods of history that were a very long time ago and shaped the current world. But Bloodborne is also explicitly cyclical with them. Because we know, like, again, a lot of Bloodborne is done through implication rather than it just being written on a sword somewhere.
There's no creation myth cutscene in the menu.
No, and there's also not, like, there's not a lot of item text in Bloodborne in comparison to the Souls games. So a lot of it is actually done just through, like, little vistas and little vignettes and pieces of visual design that sort of link everything together. So the implication is, and don't ask me for a citation because the citation is like a series of different images and things that we see throughout the game rather than a sword that straight up says this, which is what you would get in Dark Souls. That this is all cyclical, and everything that's happening now, essentially the same events occurred previously. And because the events that are occurring now are contingent on the previous events, presumably those events also happened before the things that happened now in this constant cycle that's going around and around and around. So we actually don't really have a point of origin that's given for the first thing that happened in the world.
Yeah, we have the divide between, like, Lauren and Ease is represented again with Willem and Lawrence, with the choir and Menses. It's always like you either just turn into beasts and everything kind of goes to hell, or you become kin, you become weird plant, ethereal creatures. But there seems to be all of these cultures, they always become matriarchal because women are able to carry the children of the great ones. They all find themselves queens. they all also there seems to be like every single one of these cultures aspires at some point to transcend, right?
Yes. This is one. This is one of the few things we're actually directly told through text is that when our character successfully kind of transcends humanity and becomes this eldritch squid thing, we're told that humanity has been lifted into its next childhood. So the implication from that, and also all these other things that we see, is that you just have this with successive childhoods of humanity, and sort of like, so we've become this eldritch squid thing, and then everything will sort of reset, and then we are not given a time scale, but some huge amount of time in the future, someone will stumble upon the ruins of Yharnam, and they will wonder what happened there, and this will all play out again.
They will find old blood in Yharnam.
Yeah. And yeah, this is more pronounced in the DLC in the way they design that rather than the base game. But the DLC is absolutely like pushing toward the idea that this is cyclical. This is going around and around and around. And consequently, we have a point of origin for the events in Yharnam, but like I said, they are contingent on events in other places, and we don't have a point of origin for those.
Yeah, and even in Yharnam, there does seem to be a few points where there is a bit of a timeline discrepancy, right?
Well, we're mostly talking here about the dungeons, are we? Because the dungeons don't even seem to really have a timeline. They seem to be like frozen points in history that you're visiting. It's sort of like taking
dream memories, sort of.
Yeah, to me, it's more like, if you think about archaeology, what you're doing in archaeology is you're like revisiting a point in time, and it's just making that literal in that when you dig things up, you actually are revisiting a point in time.
I always thought of it as operating on similar-ish logic to the Yharnam Nightmare, where you can meet Rom when they ascended Rom in the East Chalice. You can meet Queen Yharnam back before, assumably, Menses went in there and ripped her child out.
Well, an analogy to how the dungeons work is something Rich has brought up in the past, which is Uzumaki.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, like, this is a very, very vague connection, but I think it's in there. So Junji Ito's Uzumaki, which I assume a lot of people are familiar with, even if they haven't read it, it's a manga about a city that is built above a sort of eldritch spiral that's underground, and you don't know this at the beginning, but that's sort of the reveal. And the city is cursed by this spiral, and everything in the city begins to warp and change into a spiral. And then the reveal is that they start exploring what's underneath the city, and they discover, there is a gigantic alien spiral under the city that's what's causing everything to warp and change. And as they're descending into this spiral, it becomes very similar to the chalices in Bloodborne, where you're discovering that the big secret of the city is buried under here. And as they go further and further down, it ends with this moment where it's like, well, the deeper we go down, the slower that time is going. And once they hit the absolute bottom, there is no time anymore, and everything is frozen in a single point. And that's the idea that Ito influenced Bloodborne, I think, is like beyond question, because there are enemies in the game that are straight up just Ito designs. That like
the
snail women are just straight up from Uzumaki. A lot of the DLC, like the fishing hamlet with the lighthouse, is from Uzumaki. The body of Koz is from the thing that drifted ashore. So is the orphan, kind of. So that to me is a good way of looking at the Chalice dungeons, that sort of the deeper you go, the further back in time you're also going. It's sort of making that metaphor just physical. I mean, like, the other reason that we're saying this is because it literally does not make sense otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have to assume that the chalices are held in specific moments in time, otherwise you're like, well, why can I go down here and meet someone who's already dead? Why can I, like Queen Yharnam's a good example because the entire game hinges on her child being taken from her. But when you meet her above ground, her abdomen is like she's not pregnant anymore, and there's blood all over her dress. And when you meet her in the chalices, it's when she's pregnant, and she's sort of at the height of her power, and So in order for that to make sense, the version you meet in the chalices has to be from an earlier point in time in the game. Otherwise, nothing makes sense. And if you just say, "Well, all right, everything in the chalices is just like it is constantly; it doesn't change," then it all lines up.
Yeah. I have a question. This is to both of you because this is something I don't know if there is an answer to this or if this is just like the Great Ones come from the Dreamlands, but they also live in the Chalice dungeons and they sleep there and they create these Thumerians basically to guard their sleep.
I actually have, I guess, a question to your question. What do you mean by the Great Ones come from the Dreamlands?
I feel there was isn't there some item which specifically says so?
They inhabit the Dreamlands.
They inhabit the Dreamlands.
Yeah. Which I think is distinct from... But I mean, there's like a bunch of stuff we can get into there. The Dreamlands are somewhere that your consciousness goes, but your body doesn't need to follow. This is somewhat confusing because you can do it two ways. So like the way our character goes to the Dreamlands in game is that we physically transport there. Like either a big spider thing grabs us and takes us, or we touch something and disappear. But then you also have people like Mikolash, who he is in the Dreamlands, but his physical body stayed in Yharnam. He's like, his physical body is a mummy in a chair. And he is...
Rom maybe is in the Altar of Despair. Maybe we don't quite know.
And then you have like Lady Maria in the Waking World. She's dead. We can actually carry bits of her body around with us, but she's in the Dreamland. So, and then we have things like the situation with Kos, who presumably did enter the Waking World, and that's how she was killed. But at the same time, even though Kos is dead, she was like gutted and like organs were taken out of her and things. She still persists because the people in the hamlet can call out to her for revenge, and she will continue to haunt Yharnam until you put the orphan's spirit to rest, at which point she will stop haunting Yharnam. So she's still around. She's just her physical body's dead. So presumably, like, once you have sort of decoupled your spirit from your body, you can exist in the Dreamlands and possibly pop back into the waking world.
So, assumably, the Great Ones in the Chalice dungeons, that's where they sleep so that they can inhabit the Dreamlands.
It's something... It's something like that, because the one like legitimate great one we run into in the Chalices is Ebrietas, because Amygdala is sort of a weird space where there's a bunch of them. They seem like a species. They seem like something that's just attracted to sort of eldritch activity, and they just sort of show
like
up.
Some sort of cosmic vagabonds.
Yeah, or like pilot fish or something. Like they've got a good thing going on, so they like attach themselves to a rift or something and just eat whatever's coming through. Is Ebrietas, and they make a specific point that Ebrietas was left behind by the other Great Ones. They call her like the left behind Great One, and there's these references to her weeping because presumably she's alone. And so what we can take from that is that, well, I guess all the other ones were sufficiently advanced enough that they projected themselves into the Dreamlands and disappeared, and Ebrietas is probably just not, she's not quite powerful enough, and that's why she was left behind. So what the choir think of as this sort of magnificent being that's beyond their comprehension is kind of the runt, is kind of the one that failed and they left her behind.
Like Ron.
Well, yeah, and that I think is like probably why they stuck her with that Rom corpse thing, because it's like this is what we talk about things being cyclical. Like Ebrietas might be the Rom equivalent of Ys. this thing that was left behind, and like that they found her and brought her back, and then she then encounters Rom, who's like, oh, this is like me. There is something else like me, and then, but that thing is dead, so she's like even more alone than before.
Well, dead or just sleeping.
Well, the Rom corpse is one of the more confusing things, because you can't get there until after you've beaten the Rom boss, so there's no way to sort of test it. Yeah, but I think the idea that like that might be Rom's physical corpse and the Rom that we fight is in a dream makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like Imposter Yosefka probably would have had the cord prior to going to Yosefka's clinic.
Yeah.
You told me once, Richie, this idea that Thumerians were originally beasts given, like, who were ascended to Thumerians by the Great Ones so that they could watch over them. Is this a theory, or is this something we know?
Well, this is confusing because like the game went through a lot of revisions.
What?
I know.
A FromSoft game that goes through revisions.
Well, one of the interesting things about Bloodborne is that it went through all these revisions, but they were revisions basically to... They were like little like semantic things, basically. Like, one character got split into two characters, or two characters got combined into one character, or like an important area got moved to the DLC, or something like that. But the core like plot, the central thing about like, you know, the blood and the beasts and the great ones and vampires and everything, that was, from what I can tell, and this is going back to like 2011, I think, when they first started, that was pretty much always there. So there's a bunch of stuff that was cut, but it's like, well, it still fits with everything that we've seen. It's still thematically connected. It's not like some random like weird piece of text we dug up. So
there's no point where one of the characters just magically happens to have like, an everlasting fire that just nulls the entire point of the series.
They would never do anything like that. That would be ridiculous. So, and this got as far as being recorded, and they just cut the line. But there's a reference to what happens in Old Yharnam. There's a cut NPC who talks about what happened in Old Yharnam, and he's from Old Yharnam. So instead of being like a church person who's like trying to explain it, he's like ranting about what the church have done here. And he says like, oh, the beasts, they're the true form of man. They're the original form of man. And we're like going back to that. And that kind of makes sense. Even if you discount that, the idea that humans are like a midpoint, who were then sort of like, they were given this blood that sort of like pushed them to a new stage in evolution. And then if you take that blood again, depending on your level of control, you can either go forward or go backward. That entirely, I think, fits with what happens. And the way that, like, you know, what makes the beasts, what sort of characterizes them is this greed for blood. And then, well, what happens next? Well, you have these people who are vampires, and they have this greed for blood as well. So it seems like you don't actually shed a lot of what is bestial about you. And even like the beast runes and things, when you equip them in the beast, there's like certain weapons that rely on sort of an innate beasthood. And like, well, the beasthood is just something that's in you. So it's not like there's not really a stark divide between human and kin and beast. It's all just like one sort of continuum that everyone is somewhere along. But yeah, the idea that the Great Ones created the Thumerians to guard them is like, it's something that's in there, but it's really vague. It's like a couple of lines. But it's sort of, it's on the chalice.
It's the original Japanese Willem line too, right?
Oh yeah, that's
the blood is what.
Yeah, because he says the Bergenworth line.
The blood is what makes us.
Yeah, because it's in English. It's we're born of the blood, which like it's still kind of saying it. Like, you know, we humans are born of the blood. We're born of the blood, made men by the blood, which is essentially what like we were just saying. And in Japanese, it's just more literal. It's just like the blood makes us human. Yeah.
That's something maybe we should clean up in lore, because the Beast Scourge, it's not a disease like the Black Plague.
No.
This isn't something you can catch virally. This is very specifically, it's not even quite a disease. It's just that once you consume old blood, your body becomes malleable.
Yes.
And if you have great ones to guide your transcendence, then you can evolve into something. You can become a Thumerian. If not, then you kind of just, you have like, the beast archetype is still within you, and you just revert back to that, which is why we have the Witch of Hemwick in the Chalice dungeons. We have the Huntman's minions who become the Merciless Watchers. We have these archetypes which repeat across all these.
This is
timelines.
what I meant by like everything is cyclical.
Yes.
Yeah, and even like little details like characters with missing legs. Characters who have like one eye covered in things. Those very distinct images repeat over and over again.
We have Thumerians discovering trick weapons.
This is a good example where they'll say like, okay, Gurman from his workshop created this combat style involving these transforming weapons. And that's like probably true in the sense that he independently created them. But then when you start exploring history, it's like, oh, in the like pre-human civilization, they also had transforming weapons. They had these scythes that would split into two and stuff. That's very similar to the weapon that Eileen uses. So you can see that like, okay, it just happens over and over again. And like I talked about this with Sin in a video that we did, but like it seems like those are just reactions to the situation that you're in. Like if you're fighting a monster that is faster than you, it doesn't make sense to stock up on like heavy plate mail armor. You start wanting to dodge it. You start wanting to move around it. If you're fighting small things, you don't want to use big heavy weapons. You want to use light weapons, so it makes sense that you'd be able to switch between two. Even like the Thumerians had guns. The Thumerians had a lot of things that we just find in Yharnam, and they didn't necessarily steal the idea from Thumaru. It's just like this is something that happens because you need to come up with a solution to a problem.
And yeah, that's probably another point we should just make before we move on to the more contemporary story. Thumaru and Yharnam, they are like Yharnam just it sprung out of Thumaru as people kept building on top of the Chalice dungeon.
This is like a casualty of issues with design that forced them to change up how it worked a little. But the dungeons in Bloodborne are underneath Yharnam explicitly. Thumaru is. You're just going down because the initial plan would have been that you could just physically go from Yharnam to the dungeons. It would just be like walking down. I guess similar to when you go to that little cave under the clinic, when you just sort of go down and I'm in there. It was going to work something like that. We don't have the exact... we never recovered like assets, but based on like data and stuff, that's how it would have worked. And the way it's now works, that you go to the dream and then you warp there, makes it seem like where is this supposed to be? But like if you look at what how they're discussed, like they will straight up say this is the labyrinth beneath Yharnam, and then you have like that cave under the clinic that's clearly part of the chalices that they've broken into. The whole backstory of Bergenworth is that they dug up parts of those dungeons and started exploring them. So Thumaru is like, I think inarguably just like underneath Yharnam, and you notice like motifs in the design and things recurring, things that happened in the dungeons get recreated in Yharnam because literally it's just the top floor. They just kept building and building and building up and popped out the top, and you get Yharnam. The confusing part is that they then introduce Lauren and Ys, which I don't think it's actually possible to make sense of without like a lot of headcanoning. Because Lauren and Ys are described as separate, like just distinct places. And like Lauren is in a desert. Like I don't know. I mean, it maybe if you go down far enough, there's a desert. Or maybe like it's just really far away or something like that. But like, the Lauren and Ys really messed it up.
I think the Lauren Chalice, I think it refers to Lauren as a distant land
Yeah,
conquered by the
yeah.
sand. Is that maybe a translation issue?
I don't. I just flat out think it doesn't really make sense, and I try not to think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is sad because Lauren is one of the more. Lauren actually becomes kind of important thematically to everything that's going on. This is something that I've noticed actually in sort of being a digital archaeologist in a sense, going through all this, is that like a lot of the things that are very resonant and like thematically important and tell you a lot about the world were the last things they did. So like Lauren becomes really important to this notion that like everything is in cycles and all these ideas are happening over and over again. And then you actually like look at the development history, and Lauren was like really late. A lot of things were like, even like the character of Lawrence was really late. So like I talked to Sin about this a few times, but like it looks a lot of the things that I think are the most important parts were added very late. A lot of the very personal stuff was added late because it looks like early versions, like it was roughly the same plot, but it wasn't really about the individual people. It was more about the city. So the notion is like the city is cursed because of what the city is built on top of. And then seemingly quite late in the day, they change it to the city is cursed because of what a group of people did. And we actually encounter those people and learn about those people. And that is so much more important to me. That's so much more resonant because you're actually dealing with people. It's like it's a personal story now. It's not about like...
I wonder if that's a creative decision, that you have a more nebulous story while you're designing the game, so that you don't anchor any point of development to specific concepts, which becomes a massive headache to fix later.
Well, I sort of feel like when they started, they maybe weren't. They just had like a mass of ideas, like it was like a nebulous mass of ideas, and then that gradually became, it was like sort of like sharpening it until it worked like the way they wanted it to. So, but yeah, like the notion of like this city is cursed, but it's cursed because of what specific people did. And you can meet those people and you can see what they were doing to try to cover it up. It becomes about like a lie that was told by individual people, as opposed to like, I'm in a creepy city, and then like initially it was probably closer to like Shadow over Innsmouth or something, or like I'm in a city and then I discover the secret of the city is this thing. Whereas rather than like, it's not a personal like someone did something. That's sort of like more like gothic mystery thing. Looks like that wasn't quite in there.
And you talked about them having a lot of different ideas in the beginning, and as it goes on, the ideas sort of get more refined and more pointed, I guess. That actually reminds me of something.
What?
Have you heard about the anime Katekyo Hitman Reborn?
I fucking knew. Because you were making a little face. When you started saying that, I knew this is... I know she's going to say... She's going to start trolling us, but I don't know exactly how.
Thank you.
I hope you leave
like
that in, because she doesn't...
I'll leave this in.
Good.
I'll leave it in. I made this video because you guys have helped me so much, and I really want to direct as much traffic to you as I can, because I love you both so much. But I'm going to leave this in specifically because this is going to divert people away from your channel.
It'll divert people away from the channel, except YouTube's copyright people, who will find the channel and threaten to take it down again.
Yikes. So the more contemporary story, if I could just put it briefly, Bergenworth exists. We don't know, there's no inciting incident for it really. No. It's just we have these scholars, some from Yharnam, some just random humans.
I don't think any of them are from Yharnam.
No, just some humans then.
Yeah.
And they basically... They are philosopher, mystics, academics.
Well, yeah, it'd be. They're just scientists. I don't know. Are you keeping video of this, or are we just audio? okay,
Just
I'm doing air quotes here, scientists in like a very broad sense, where they're with it, because I mean, like, if you look at the history of science, like the notion of sort of neatly dividing it up into like, well, this is like a biologist and this is a something elseist. There was just like the sciences, and you would sort of look into like little bits and pieces of all of them. So the idea of yeah. So Bergenworth are just like they're people who are trying to understand the world, which is a mixture of like what you would call like hard sciences, and also, which I hate the distinction, but whatever. It's a mixture of that, and like they're also philosophers and just mystics. And
It's like how Isaac Newton, he spent half of his time doing calculus, he spent the other half doing
yeah,
alchemy, and
yeah, that's
like
that. Yes.
you have like characters like John Dee or Edward Dee or whatever his name is. It's just like we explore literally every facet of the world
Yeah.
from as many perspectives as we can.
Well,
So
it's that, but like the perspective taken is still, at least from what you can glean, the perspective is still a very kind of 19th century empiricist one, where they are trying.
I just meant compared
Yeah,
to our
definitely.
scientists. That's what they did.
Yeah. Well, they do that, but they do it sort of with the attitude of like a 19th century empiricist, of basically saying, "Well, I just know everything. Like I figured things out by cutting them up and looking at them. So I don't need to like really open myself up to certain, like the idea that other perspectives might be valid is not important." And that's
maybe don't kill little
well,
orphans.
that to me is like that's part of what makes the story resonate with me.
Yeah.
Like I was saying about like making it more personal, because one of the things that keeps happening in the story is that they will try over and over again at this enormous human cost to understand what it means to transcend, understand what it means to leave humanity behind and become something else. But they try to understand it through like cutting things up and taking them apart and looking at how they work, like in this what they think of as a sort of distant, dispassionate way. And they're like experimenting on people and injecting them with all these things and just like measuring and like trying to figure everything out from that perspective. And it never, ever, ever, ever works. And the only thing that actually does work is a parent-child bond. That's where it comes from. It's the notion that these hyper-advanced organisms, they're in a perpetual state of mourning because they've lost their children. That's what they actually need to engage with. And the whole story, there's all these different factions. They all attempt to approach this question of transcendence from all these different perspectives, and it never ever works until they actually just give up and say like that bond is what's important. So that's why you you start off with.
I think the implication. Sorry. I think the implication with Lauren specifically is that at some point, after just being the biggest prick in the world, he would have realized, you know what? I've kind of taken things too far. I need to ditch the healing church. I need to ditch, all this infrastructure I've created, and I need to meet back up with Gurman because we need to get a grip over what I've unleashed. And when he meets with Gurman, he's able to, with the court from Annalise, he's able to make audience with the Great Ones. And when he goes like, "Hey, Gurman, I'll free you. Like, I know I've given you kind of a rotten deal. I'm going to go and fetch another one of these, and I'm going to free you." So it seems like at the end, he did come to understand it.
Yeah, because and that's true of like all these factions. So you have like Mikolash, who seems to be kind of Lawrence's, like, again, this is all done through like implication and like sort of vaguish connections, but seems to be kind of Lawrence's apprentice or Lawrence's second in command or just like Lawrence's simp or something, who when it's time for him to like continue on this great work, he digs, again, importantly, he digs up an old part of the city. He doesn't do it in the big fancy workshop. He goes to this very old sort of forgotten place and just conducts this mass human sacrifice, because like it's just sort of like just giving up before this thing you don't understand, saying, "I don't understand you." So I am. It's like I am. The reason that it gets to me specifically is that you have this thing, I don't understand it, like the great ones, this sort of like what's beyond humanity. It's like, I will understand it, and hacking it up and looking at it and trying to figure out, I have to figure out how this works, I have to figure out how all these organs work, I have to figure out what quantities of blood and what quantities of water and how they interface with certain kinds of plant, and just doing all this and then realizing I don't understand this, I can't understand this. The only way for me to engage with it is to engage with it on its rules, and just sort of like, it's like dropping to your knees and saying, I don't know. So I am just going to have to do it. I'm following the lead of this thing now. I'm not beyond it. I'm not above it.
I'm gonna have to go mad.
Yeah, exactly.
Allow my mind is too limited to get the framework.
Yeah.
So I need to break the limitations of my own mind, and then I'll be able to.
Yeah.
Or they could just watch some What, Where, Why.
They could do that. And that's a mid-episode plug here. I think you guys have done literally an episode on everything in Bloodborne.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly watching a playlist of like the notes of Bloodborne, and I was like, "Oh, that's a funny joke." Literally all the notes.
Well, when Sin said to me we're doing notes of Bloodborne, I also said, "Oh, that's a funny joke." And then, yeah, Sin does want to do... This is how we sort of met, because Sin knew that I knew a lot about Bloodborne, and she had some questions. She's like, can you explain this thing? And it's like, all right, we'll do this. And then I just stuck around, basically. Yeah. I feel like that's actually been weirdly useful, because Bloodborne's story is like, it's a little different to the other Souls games. So maybe looking at it like the way that everything is kind of connected to everything else in some way. Maybe looking at like every individual note and every individual enemy sort of does help, because it helps you create this sort of web of seeing how everything's connected. Because like if you look at like Dark Souls 2 particularly, there's all of these like kingdoms and all of these like characters you hear about and characters you meet and your knights who are sad, but a lot of them aren't actually connected to anything else, because it's like, there's not a criticism, it's just like it's trying to create a whole world. So you just hear like, here's this kingdom, it's like here's Alkin and Ven and they had a thing going on, and then here's Kareen, they had a thing going on, but they're not necessarily interconnected in any way. It just feels like here's just a bunch of stuff happened. Whereas in Bloodborne, like, because it's a smaller scale thing, because it's like it's one night. It's in a very
local setting.
Yeah. It's a game that takes place over one night in one city, and then there are places outside of the city, but they're just like outside the city. They somehow connect back to it, like Bergenwith or Hemwick. That's like as like a town outside of it. So everything is connected to everything else in a lot of ways, and that makes it sort of interesting to talk about. And interesting to sort of try to talk about holistically, I guess, because if you can bring up one thing, it's probably connected to something else, and they probably like they're not just The thing is, like, they're not just connected narratively. A lot of them actually aren't necessarily connected narratively, but they will comment on each other. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of churches in Bloodborne, but all of them give you a slightly different perspective on what is happening in that church. Like, a good example is you go to, like, again, you can do this at any time, but we'll just assume you do it in this order. If you go to, like, Old Yharnam, you see the blood-starved beast, and it's in this, like, destroyed church, and there's a beast by the altar with a chalice. Mm. And then it's all ruined, and the town is on fire and everything. And then you go to Cathedral Ward, and you see a church that is yet to be destroyed. But outside of it, there are the servants with the crucifixes where you would have put a burning beast in Old Yharnam. And there is a woman by the altar, and then she turns into a beast. And you see, oh, all right, I saw where this is going already. And now I'm seeing sort of what led to that. And then later on, you see, like, in the Nightmare of Menses, there is another, like, very similar church thing, but this time it's a spider. You can say, okay, it's going in this direction now. And you can see how all these things kind of interconnect, as opposed to, like, you know, like in Dark Souls 3, where there's just, like, we need a way to connect these two areas. Oh, you just walk through a church. The church with the outrider that's just like, this is the path you take, but it's not clear what did they do here? What is this a church to? Where is it's just a church because we just needed a space. Yeah. So that's why I think, like, even though it's born out of Sin's obsession with cataloging literally everything in the game, it is like, I think it is helpful. It is a valid approach to making sense of it all.
Yeah, and the reason Richie and I sort of met in the first place is because I love Bloodborne very much, and I was obsessed with the lore, and I was trying to find answers that maybe were not obvious or maybe didn't even exist. But Richie was able to sort of answer my questions and provide some context and information. And I think that the individual episodes are kind of good because, like Richie said, Bloodborne is so interconnected that to explain one concept, you have to explain another. You have to explain, like, why is Lawrence the bloodletting beast in the dungeons? Well, because we find the skull in the church. What church? That church, the healing church. Who founded it? Lawrence. When? Well, you know, he was in Bergenworth, and then him and Lawrence didn't agree. What's Bergenworth? Well, so I just feel like you just have to explain so many things.
Yeah.
That explaining,
and it all branches in so many directions.
Yeah.
Everything is it's like this gigantic web where everything is connected to everything else, and things don't make sense in isolation. And I think that's why it has that reputation for being like, the story is so confusing, you'll never make sense of it all. And like, it's not confusing. It's actually extremely straightforward and consistent. It's just that everything is kind of connected to everything else in a way that's can be a little vague if you're not like actually laying it out. Because like I think, like, again, like, it sounds weird that we've got all these episodes out of this story and I'm saying it's not confusing, but like it really isn't. Like, if it was confusing, I don't think I would care.
Yeah, like, knowing as much about the story as I do, I look at it and I'm like, well, this... I look at, like, the Forbidden Woods, and I go, oh, well, this is obviously an area meant to, like, explore the idea of vermin. Like, you look at the snakes that have, like, the giant snake balls that have ticks on them. You look at the villagers who have, like, the snakes blowing out of their heads. Walter is located there. But if you don't get, like, it is very easy to go through the game and only think, oh, vermin are like an online item. They're like collectibles. No. That's like a big theme in the game that reoccurs many, many times.
Yeah. It's a thing. Miyazaki does this a lot, like in the other games as well, where he'll basically tell stories backwards, where you'll see the effect of something and it will have no context. And then what that chunk of the game will be about is about deciphering the cause of what happened. But I think because you do it in that order, and also because, like, Bloodborne is kind of difficult, so in between each plot point there might be like 5 hours of you dying and like struggling through an area, and then when you finally get to the end and you see something, you're like, what the hell is this? Whereas if you had just seen those two things in order to be like, oh, it's that. Pale Blood's a really good example of that.
I was just thinking that.
God, fucking Pale Blood.
You know how you find a note that says seek Pale Blood to transcend the hunt?
What does it mean?
You will never remember it until your next playthrough, and you'll be like, oh, what?
This is the thing, people just arguing about Pale Blood for going on 6 years now. So, like, this is the Pale Blood situation. Like, it's actually really straightforward, just going off what's in the game. It's like, you start the game. There's a note. Seek Pale Blood to transcend the hunt. What the hell is Pale Blood? I have no idea. Go talk to Gilbert. Gilbert says, I don't know what Pale Blood is, but try going to the church. Go to the church. Amelia turns into a monster, so you don't find out what Pale Blood is. Way later on, you find a note on the ground in, like, the church's secret sacrifice place that says, behold a Pale Blood sky. Oh, all right. Then you find Gurman's old workshop. There's a note. There's not a note, but it's on the core description. It says, like, yeah, this is where we beckon to the pale moon. And it's like, oh, okay. Then way later on, you beat up a spider, and the sky goes purple, and giant red moon shows up. And then you find a note again that says like Lawrence's moon monster was summoned. It says like Lawrence's moon thing, Pale Blood. And at this point, you don't know anything about like the moon presence because you haven't met it yet. And then you get to the end, and then you meet Lawrence's moon monster, and it's like, oh, this is where they summoned the Pale Moon. Presumably pale. Like again, this is like a translation thing. It was Pale Blood. So when the Pale Moon is here, and then like if you successfully beat the moon presence, you become a Great One and transcend. So just lining it all up, like it's a very basic thing, which is like it's a standard mystery structure of like, I'm looking for pale blood. What is pale blood? I'm conditioned to think it's a kind of blood because it's Yharnam. There's everyone's obsessed with blood. I'm just looking for this blood. Then it turns out, no, it's actually a reference to this like red moon that comes down and this weird sky. That's pale blood. So by seeking the pale blood, which is actually like the moon thing in the sky, I was able to transcend the hunt by becoming something other than human. So it is literally just that. But because that is told in such a fragmented way over such a long period of time, it took on this significance as like this thing that can never be understood when it's just that.
Yeah. That's actually one thing about Bloodborne, which I think is a massive like downgrade from coming from Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Demon Souls had the Monumental, Dark Souls had Frampt and Koth. Bloodborne does not have like a character who just guides you through the adventure.
Yeah, that's
like,
a real...
It's really strange that Gurman, for example, like why isn't it Gurman? You just go back to him over and over again, and he's like, okay, look, you went to the Grand Cathedral, nobody was there. Oh, well, probably you can find some answers in Bergenworth.
Yeah,
Instead, it's just like you talk to Gilbert, you go to the Grand Cathedral, you learn about Bergenworth, you talk to Alfred on your way there, who talks a bit about Bergen, and like it's separated amongst so many different points.
And like you said, like there's Gilbert seems to be the one guiding you, but then after Amelia, he basically does nothing of significance, and then and they sort of address that in the DLC by adding Simon.
I love Simon.
Simon
so
is like the
much
closest you get. I believe Sin has a question. She's gesturing at me.
So I'm going to have to disagree with you guys on that. I actually liked it that it didn't have somebody telling you what to do or where to go, because it felt very different.
Lost in the world.
Felt like a mystery.
Yeah, very different from a regular game where you have somebody pointing, somebody telling. There's no map. And this was my first Soulsborne experience. For some reason, my boyfriend thought that it was a good idea to give it to me on my birthday, knowing I have never played a Souls game before. But, eventually I grew to love it. And I really, at first, I did not like the fact that there were no pointers, there were no markers, there was no map, there was no pause, there was nothing. But you sort of, how would I say it? Cut out me being
sort of
stupid.
Intuited.
Acer.
Yeah.
Cut out every time I go and just like take too long and say something dumb. Yeah. But but once you get used to all those things, you almost feel like all the other games are lacking the lack of map and pointers and people to guide you. So I actually really appreciated it because it felt like something I think you, Rich, and I talked about when we talked about Kingsfield, where it doesn't feel like the world was made for you. It just feels like you're a character put in a world to explore it.
Yeah. But like to me, the difference is also that in the Dark Souls games and in Demon Souls, even though you're not guided around as much, you still have this overarching goal, which is like, in Dark Souls, like, gotta ring those 2 bells. And that's pretty much all the direction that you get. And like one is above and one is below, and that's sort of all. You gotta go find them, and you're not given much direction, like where to go, how to get there, but roughly you've got to ring 2 bells, have this overarching goal. Dark Souls 3, it's like got to find the Lords of Cinder. Demon Souls, it's just got to kill the demons to link the Archstones. Bloodborne has got to find Pale Blood for the first, like, third and then you just don't have a goal anymore. Things just sort of happen. And like going over older versions of it, like you did initially have, like, there was an overarching goal to it, which was you would have traveled to Yharnam with a friend of yours who went missing, and your goal was to find the friend. So it was set up from the beginning, like, this is a detective story. This is a mystery. You're literally driven to overcome, like, this city to like excavate it to find out what happened. Whereas this one's like, you're just some schmuck who wakes up and it's like, hey, go kill beasts. And that's sort of all that.
Yeah.
But at no point, no one ever actually says, like, you might want to think about going to that Bergenworth now. That just never happens. And like, again, like there's another version that's like, this is what I mean. It's the same story, the same things happen, but there is, like you said, there is a character who basically says to you, oh, like when you beat the Amelia equivalent, who's like, yeah, okay, like, oh, thank you for if you want to fix the problem in Yharnam, you have to go to this university that's through the forest. But that's completely absent. The closest you get is like Alfred mentions
Simon
Bergenworth.
DLC.
And I think he's sort of getting at that when he's like, everything that's sacred to Yharnam is in Bergenworth, which makes you think, oh, I guess Pale-Blood's there. But
yeah, and he's just like very conveniently located on the path to Bergenworth.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, you need some lore about Bergenworth, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to my outline, which you guys have rudely destroyed.
Oh no.
So what is actually going on? Well, we didn't really talk about like the world before the story, but like basically Bergenworth, they found the Chalice dungeons and they thought, hey, wouldn't it be a neat idea if we tried to evolve and become great ones ourselves? And Willem was like, this Ram character that we managed to create, that wasn't so good. No. Maybe we need to meditate and basically just rot our brains. And Lawrence was like, nah, we just experiment. I'm ready now.
Basically, yeah.
And Lawrence, all that stuff in Canehurst, all that stuff that's happening in Yharnam, everything goes to hell. Like we said earlier, he and Gurman construct a dream to give themselves a fighting chance to finish off the beasts. In the world right now, what is actually, like, what is our character, what is going on right now with, like, the choir and Menses?
Wait, we're not going to talk even a little about the best parts of Bloodborne? The best parts of Bloodborne are, first of all, as you mentioned, there's Bergenworth. And then there are these scholars who find the dungeons. But then they go into the dungeons and they realize that because they're scholars, they don't know how to fight.
Can confirm.
So Richie calls Sin to take care of the beasts.
I would.
So the scholars call hunters to take care of the beasts. And I think this is very interesting because that points to hunters existing in Yharnam.
Oh, yes.
So
the hunters predate the Scourge of the Beast.
Yeah. Richie, since Richie and I have a very interesting relationship when I can direct Richie to a conversation, but he's much better than me at talking. He is more experienced and experiences less anxiety. So Richie, could you please elaborate on the hunters and them existing before Bergenworth and Scourge and all that stuff?
Thank you, Sin. Okay, so like Sin was saying, the recent history of Yharnam involves the Bergenworth scholars excavating the chalices. And when the chalices are the dungeons. I know it's confusing. Sounds like they're digging up a cup, which they kind of are. But they go into these dungeons and they discover the dungeons are full of weird monsters and there's beasts in the dungeons. So this is one of the confusing things because it's not ever directly stated what the sequence of events here is, the order is, but we know that Bergenworth and the Hunters ended up working together. So it makes sense that, like, well, clearly what happened is they went into these dungeons that were full of weird monsters. They're a bunch of scholars. They don't know how to fight anything. So they recruit these hunters as basically guards, as people who can help them explore the labyrinth. And that raises this question of like, oh, okay, so there were already, prior to there being a healing church, prior to anyone digging this blood up, there were already people who specialized in hunting beasts. And like they are like when Gurman is recruited as like when you see like Gurman, this is in a trailer, but it's a trailer that From made. So you see Gurman as a like prior to the events of the story, and he's already oldish then. It's like about 20 years beforehand, we think, but he looks to be in his like 50s or 60s. So there's already like you can be a beast hunter who's been hunting beasts all their life in this world before there is a healing church. So again, the simplest way to look at it is that, well, I mean, Yharnam's already got all this blood. Like, it's already there. They already have, like, churches where they're worshipping it and stuff. There were probably already beasts in Yharnam. And people turning into shit in Yharnam. It's just that the Healing Church exacerbated it. The Healing Church kind of, like, just made it really, really bad by prodding it and experimenting with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that I find interesting that Aesir skipped over is that...
Aesir.
So bad.
When Bergenworth employed the hunters, Willem got word of a fishing hamlet where a great one stayed. And they went to the fishing hamlet, I'm assuming at Willem's request, to encounter a great one named Kaz. But what's...
Did they go... did they go specifically because of Kaz, or did they just go because they found, like, these fishmen are strange, and there's probably something we can learn from them?
This is where I was going, actually. Richie pointed... Was it Richie? I'll just say generally, sorry. We talked about this on a podcast, and there's a chant by the inhabitants of the fishing hamlet that specify how the hunters encountered Kaz. Richie, could you elaborate?
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is something that's in the game, but it's really easy to miss because of how it's done. So, you know, in the fishing hamlet area, you can hear all these women talking when you're near the houses. They're sort of... That's all, like, those are actual, like, lines of dialogue, and they're just played over each other. So you have real trouble distinguishing them. I remember Vardy actually did a video where he stayed in front of the thing recording it, trying to, like, piece together what they were saying, and it's borderline impossible because it's all these whispers overlaid over other whispers. But now that we have the game, like, dumped and cracked and extracted, we can listen to all those files separately. And they give you the story, which is that, like, they say, cause we have beckoned, now cause is no more, forgive us. And cause we have beckoned, now cause is dead. So you get from that, okay, they actually called Cos to shore, and that's where she was killed. Because prior to that, like, it was very confusingly worded, because you would go to the beach, Cos's corpse would be there. You would get the item, and the item would say that this was discovered when the body of Cos washed ashore. Which led to this whole thing about, like, well, was Cos dead when everyone arrived? Or was she killed on the shore? Because the way it's described is she was already dead. And, like, I talked to you about this, and I don't know if it made it into your commentary, about the Drifted Ashore God.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
That is in the video.
Yeah. So when it came out, I was partial to the idea of the Drifted Ashore God, because I liked the idea of the Hamlet worshipping something that was already dead. They're just worshipping a corpse. But then the more we looked into it, it's like, no, it does seem like Cos was, like, alive. They called Cos to the shoreline, and then she was killed there. Yeah.
I specifically would theorize that if it's drawing from Shadow over Innsmouth, they made deals with the sea-dwelling deep ones to get more gold. I think the implication with all the fish in the area is that probably there was no fish. They beckoned Cos, like the Drifted Ashore God, and it was like, hey, could you please give us fish? And there's a lot of fish, so clearly Cos delivered.
Well, there's a lot of slugs. because you can see. This is the thing about the hamlet, because
those aren't fish.
there's
in,
slugs.
Like, the hamlet?
No, this is the thing about the hamlet. You can see all around it. There is all this fishing gear. There's like nets and harpoons and those little like floating ball things they use to catch fish. They're everywhere, but they're not being used anymore. They're all like rusted and old, and there's all these ships like they would have been used to fish, but the ships are all like they're all discarded. They're all sinking. And then you find this massive space that I think at some point was probably like a fishery, like somewhere where they would gut fish or something.
Like a refinery.
And now it is just slugs. So what has happened is that they were at some point a fishing village. They encountered Cause, and Cause provides this source of slugs that they'll just live off the slugs now to prevent them having to go into the ocean. And as someone who keeps slugs, I can confirm that if you get one slug and there's no predators, within a couple of months you will have about 20 slugs, and then each one of them will produce another 20 slugs. So it's not hard if you get one slug to... You can very easily imagine that becoming the staple food source of the hamlet. But yeah, like interestingly, those slug models that you see in the fishing hamlet that are like all over the ground and stuff, if you have the Cos parasite and the milkweed rune, when they synergize, you actually use those slugs as an attack. Like it's like it's the same model, like literally the same thing. You can vomit those slugs out as a projectile weapon. So it is clearly like the Cos parasites are like, even though the thing you get doesn't look like a slug, it looks like a weird I don't know what it looks like. It's like a Precambrian flower or something.
It looks a bit like this silky little cloth.
Yeah, but that thing, when that is in you, you have the Cos like the Cos parasites are the weird like the slugs from the hamlet. It's the same model, and they're now inside your body, so you can see how it all sort of like lines up.
And those parasites are phantasms.
Yes,
which are the vermin of great ones ish.
They're
kind of
definitely counterpointed with the vermin, because there's the notion of like these are the two paths. There's like the beasts and the great ones, and they're sort of opposites.
There's East and Lauren.
Yeah, so
there is the Eye of a Blood Drunk Hunter. There's the Black Sky Eye.
Yeah, exactly. The Black Sky and the Blood Drunk Hunter Eye are good examples, because the Blood Drunk Hunter Eye is someone who's got vermin, and it specifically says this eye rotted, this eye collapsed in on itself. It's like just a pile. It's like the remnants of an eye. Whereas you have the Black Sky Eye, which is full of phantasms, and that's like it specifies this thing is really like this is like nice, like firm and well preserved eyeball. In the game, it's making a point of like, well, the eye is knowledge, the eye is enlightenment. So when you have these phantasms, they actually keep the eye fresh, they keep the eye like pure. When you have the blood drunk one, the vermin make the eye rot out. So
yes, you can also make the comparison between those snake infested villagers versus the brain suckers.
Yeah.
The brain sucker has all of these arcane magics at their disposal.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, the reason why I really like that part is because that is something we talked about more recently, whereas before I didn't picture the hunters coming in a village and just being like, hi, we're just here to talk. Could you summon your great one? And when the great one is summoned, basically the hunters just start killing everyone. It's like very horrible, very impactful.
Yeah, that's what I mean about it working better as a personal story. Because if it had just been like this was found, like they sort of do that in Sekiro, where Ashina's built atop the Mibu village, and there's this sort of like there's this story there about like sort of the damage that was done to Mibu village and the way Mibu village has like been cut off from Fountainhead and all this stuff. But it's all sort of like politics. It's like how these things relate historically, and you know how like the interactions worked. Whereas in Bloodborne, it's that, but it's also like this is a bad thing Gurman did, and that to me, like that sort of has more immediacy to me, because it's like, oh, okay, Gurman did something terrible, and now he's tortured by it, and like Lawrence did something terrible, and Maria did something terrible, and you see how that impacts on actual people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that I find interesting is the schism that developed between Lawrence and Willem. And I find it interesting because when I started being interested in lore, like 5 years ago, there was one perception of the schism. Whereas after I talked to Richie, I saw it in a different way.
Oh yeah, this has been like a confusion which is still being cleaned up in the Bloodborne lore, right? You're talking about insight versus.
This is something that actually loops around to the question 20 minutes ago about like the choir and Menses. So I think we can maybe get this thing home on time.
Awesome.
Okay. So what happens with Lawrence and Willem is that if you like this, what is that they split over the use of the old blood. Willem says no, 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 and Willem says no, 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 and Lawrence says yes, I can. That's essentially like what happens, and then that leads to, within the sort of people who were looking at the story, the assumption that there's the schism is over whether or not you should ever use this blood or whether you should use this thing that is called insight. And this was like all over the place when it started. It was in that video Vardy made, and I think that's sort of what codified it for a lot of people. That the difference is Byrgenwerth is all like, we need eyes on the inside. We need to make our brains more powerful. We need to like get all this insight and all this enlightenment. And then the church is the opposite, and it's like no, blood, blood good. They inject people with blood, make monsters. And what it really is that they both want the same thing. They both want to make humans transcend to become the great ones, to become superior beings, to become this like new super race.
They both intend to do so with the old blood.
They both want to use the old blood. The difference is that Willem sees the problems that is causing in Byrgenwerth. So you see like on the Metamorphosis, weirdly, you don't see beasts in Byrgenwerth, but like if you read the Metamorphosis text, it's like, it just says like excesses of deviation and excesses. Like it says like the Metamorphosis caused these like deviations, these excesses that
in English, it specifically says evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's another thing.
That's not the metamorph. That's not okay. Forget it. Cut it out.
Okay.
Cut it out, Acer. Go ahead.
I'll do that.
Cut it. So what's happening with Willem and Lawrence is that at Byrgenwerth, they were both messing around with this old blood, and it was causing what is described on the Metamorphosis rune as excesses of deviation. So we don't really find out much about exactly what those were. We just know they existed, but it lines up with, blood, metamorphosis, deviation. We don't know exactly what it turned into. And then Willem places this ban on the blood as a result of that. So, like, presumably Rom is one of those. That, Rom is, like, on the path to becoming a great one, but didn't quite make it. The idea being she's the vacuous spider. She's vacuous because she's not enlightened enough to control this blood. So even though she's somewhere on the way to transforming into a new species, it doesn't quite work. It sort of aborts and leaves her as this, like, the vacuous spider. She's, like, kind of dumb, but she's got some arcane powers. So what happens is after all these, like, issues arise, Willem says... And this is the text in-game, it's confusing. He says, evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race. Which basically means that, this is clearer in Japanese, where it's like a deviant evolution or a degenerate evolution or whatever will be our ruin. The idea is, we're evolving, but if we don't get this right, we will be destroyed. We will end up like Lauren. We will be like, we will turn back into beasts. It will all be, all this will be for nothing. We will destroy humanity. So he says stop. And that's what the Byrgenwerth adage is getting at. When it says, we're born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. And then he says, our eyes are yet to open, fear the old blood. That's one statement. It's not, our eyes are yet to open, fear the old blood. It's like, our eyes are yet to open, fear the old blood. Fear the old blood because our eyes are yet to open. So he's like, we need to get our brains working in such a way that we are enlightened enough to control this blood. because we should not be dabbling in this if we're not smart enough. We don't understand it. And that's why when you find Willem, he is on his little lunarium in his rocking chair looking at the moon because he's thinking and he's like meditating and he's like, I'm trying to get in touch with the great ones. I'm trying to make myself think differently. I've got this like cord from the child of a great one and I'm just thinking and thinking and thinking to try to make...
Closed off my eyes
exactly.
Try to get internal stimuli.
Yeah. He's like sensory deprivation Willem, trying to like make his brain work differently. Lawrence breaks from them because he says, no, I'm ready now. I can do this now. I just need to like just experiment, and that's how I'll do it. So the break between them is not blood versus eyes on the inside, blood versus insight. It's just Willem is an old conservative, timid person who is worried about what will happen. And Lawrence is the younger, ambitious, kind of hubristic one who says, no, I can do this. That's what the break is. That's why they make this clearer in the DLC, but that's like you go to the research hall, what happens in the research hall? You stick a symbolic eye inside of a skull to make the thing go up. The people there, like there's a couple of beasts there, but it's mostly just people with giant heads because they're experimenting to try to get there. Like they're trying to contact the great ones through their heads. They're not trying to make superhumans. They're trying to do the exact same thing Willem was doing, just basically without regulations, without anyone telling them to stop. So that,
and they're trying to, it's basically like factory assembly line, and dumping inside into these people's heads.
Right. So then the Healing Church becomes this extremely powerful organization because they have access to the old blood, which is like part of Yharnam's history. I've talked about this a little bit before. I don't know if we'll have time to go into it because we're running out of time now. But the idea is like Yharnam, because they are descended from Thumaru, they are obsessed with like their own blood, their own superiority. They're very insular. Like Yharnam blood is like, Yharnam blood is like the most potent blood. Like you can, like outsiders cannot partake of our blood. Bunch of outsiders show up with like, hey, we've got some of that blood that you guys are obsessed with, only it's way more potent because it's from even further back in history. This is like the purest stuff. This is like pure Yharnam blood. That's why they become so powerful. So what happens is that because they're so powerful, they become a very large organization. Byrgenwerth are quite small. And this is where we get this split. The same split essentially happens because at some point in recent history, we don't really have a set timeline, but at some point within recent history, Lawrence's plan categorically fails. It blows up in his face. Lawrence is transformed into a beast and dies. The church are left leaderless, and then Yharnam turn on the church. So everything has gone horribly, horribly wrong. But because this has happened over quite a period of time, we're not, again, given a set time scale, but I think about 20 years is probably right since Lawrence shows up, from Lawrence showing up to where we are now. And what happens is when Lawrence shows up and he's making his big, important healing church, he recruits a bunch of orphans from Yharnam that are like children, and he raises them to be like the next generation. He makes sure they're like very, very educated and like they're very, very like they've learned all these things. They spend all day meditating. They spend all day looking at the sky and things like that to try to make his own like the next generation of like super enlightened scholars.
He dresses himself up as Willem, as we can see in the statue. He's basically trying to reproduce Byrgenwerth.
Yeah, he's trying to reproduce Byrgenwerth. So by the time Lawrence screws up, and there's really no question that Lawrence has screwed up, you have these two groups within the church. So you've got the choir, who are the orphans, who are a little more independent. And then you have the School of Menses, who are, again, this is one of those things like they don't straight up say because it's all done through implication. But the leader of the School of Menses is Mikolash. Mikolash is dressed like he is from Byrgenwerth. So, and he talks about Rom. He talks about stuff he would only know about if he were at Byrgenwerth. And Mikolash's age in-game, like everyone's got an age slider, his age in-game is like middle-aged. So it makes sense that, okay, well, when Lawrence left to found the Healing Church, he probably wasn't the only one who left. He probably took other people with him. So Mikolash was...
Also, Mikolash might have been in the nightmare for some time.
Well, no, but what I'm getting at is like Mikolash, probably as a younger man, in his, like, when he was, say, like, if Bergman is a university, like, say Mikolash is an undergrad, he's, like, in his 20s. And Lawrence is, like, a senior academic in maybe his, like, 30s or 40s. They leave together. So at this point in the game, like, Lawrence is an older man, Mikolash is like in his 40s now. Lawrence would be in his like 60s, and he's dead, so who cares? So Mikolash seems to want to just carry on what Lawrence was doing, because you get the impression he is sort of like, it's not that Lawrence's plan was wrong, it's Lawrence wasn't smart enough. And you see that with like the way he talks, he babbles constantly during his boss fight. And he's very, very dismissive of Rom. He's very, very dismissive, saying like, you know, we'll just like, he says like, oh, like, as he's talking, he's praying to Cos. And again, like, he knows who Cos is, which very heavily implies he was at Bergenworth. He's saying, as you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes. So he's like, he just wants to carry on what they were doing. And that's kind of what the School of Menses is. So the split happens within the Healing Church because the choir are aware that Lawrence is screwed up. And they start taking, like, going back to Bergenworth, which is somewhere that they've never been to. They presumably learned about it. So they have started to go back to Bergenworth and realize maybe this Willem guy was right. Willem had the right idea that, like, we're just not enlightened enough to control this blood yet. So when you go to where the remnants of the choir are, it's like a big open space with like this sky above it, and it mentions like the choir out there looking at the sky. You see there's the balcony with the make contact corpse on it, because that person is doing what Willem is doing. They're outside all night looking at the sky, trying to make contact with the stars in the same way Willem is trying to make contact with it. So that's what that break happens. And then throughout the game you see this like behind the scenes war between them, where Menses are sending out like people to like mess with the choir. So you see like there's like a dead choir person who's held captive where Menses are in Yahagul. Menses Scholar Damien is a character who was added in the DLC as a summon, but like when you summon him, he's summoned specifically to wreck the choir's shit.
Like a Briatus,
yeah, like
Rom.
yeah, because this is again like the scattered notes in the game that if you just read the text, it's like this could be from anyone, but if you actually look at where they are, it's a different story. It's like there is a note that says like basically, hey, there's this big spider out there, don't touch it. Because if you touch
where the spider holds all manner of secrets or all manner of rituals, because true enlightenment need not be shared. It says something like that.
It's like true enlightenment need not be shared. The Japanese is a lot more imperative. It's like the enlightenment must not be shared. So that you find that near a member of the choir who is in Bergenworth. So presumably the idea is like, okay, that person from the choir, they came to Bergenworth, they met Rom, they realized what was going on. They realized if we mess with this spider and the red moon comes down, we're all dead. So they leave this note saying, like, do not damage the spider, do not touch the spider. The spider is hiding enlightenment, but you don't want the enlightenment because basically you're not ready for enlightenment yet. And then what we get in that area is you can also summon Mensa Scholar Damien, who will proceed to kill Rom. So, yeah. So that's your little, the schism happens again, basically, because the choir realized that maybe Willem was right and humans aren't ready yet. But again, like, because Willem is so conservative, because he's so kind of sedentary, I don't know how you describe him, but basically he is in a situation where, because he was so worried that humans weren't enlightened enough, he never did anything because it was never going to be perfect, whereas Lawrence rushed into it and it messed up for him as well.
Bouncing off of true enlightenment need not be shared, that's basically saying if you screw with the spider, the red moon is going to appear.
Yeah.
The red moon, it is basically it's kind of like old blood for the mind, where it just like the old blood makes the body malleable. The red moon, it breaks the limitations of the mind. which is why everybody goes insane once it happens.
I think it makes everything like it makes the world malleable. Like the world,
that actually makes
yeah,
sense because
everything.
we have a bunch of Yarnamites merged to Yahar'gul.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the geography.
everything just like it's like the veil between worlds is pierced. So like this is it doesn't. This thing is like it doesn't necessarily turn you into a beast. It does if you've been messing with Old Blood. So some people just go mad. Imposter Yosef is a good example where like she is trying to use the Red Moon to make herself into a Great One by she's out there, she's got her cord under the Red Moon trying to think to like control the transformation. But then like someone like Gilbert, because Gilbert was given this big dose of blood ministration, he does transform. And then you have like the people in Yahar'gul who just meld into a wall. You have the people in the chapel who just go insane.
You have Ariana who
Ariana
gets pregnant.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Red Moon
that,
amplifies whatever's going on.
Is Ariana's pregnancy connected to the Red Moon? I had always assumed that, and I put this in the video, and I'm not changing it.
You're assuming it's connected to Odin?
Yeah, my thinking...
No, it's that the Red Moon, like... There's another note in Bergenworth that's like the boundary between worlds. Oh, no, yeah. The boundary... Yeah, they talk about the boundary between man and beast, but like the Japanese is just like the boundary.
Yeah, the boundary of man.
The boundary of man.
Vague.
Yeah. So what happens is like the Red Moon, when that's in the sky, like the boundary is broken. So the Great Ones have a little more potential to like reach through. That's why you suddenly get Amygdala all over Yahar'gul after the Red Moon. Like it's the Red Moon reveals the Amygdala. The one in Erden Chapel is always there. The one outside Yahar'gul is always there. But the ones inside Yahar'gul only show up when the Red Moon happens. So the idea is like that just made it more permeable. They showed up as a result of that. Yeah.
All right, so we come into Yharnam. Our character comes into Yharnam for blood transfusions, for God only knows.
Well, this is there's two little confusing things here. The first is that we are never told why we came to Yharnam.
No.
But in all the pre-release information, all the like interviews and things, Miyazaki is just like very, very straightforwardly casual about it. He says you came to Yharnam because you were sick. And you wanted to get a blood transfusion to fix the sickness. And there's actually there's deleted lines at the beginning where the blood minister just says like, oh yes, the sickness that ravages your homeland, and they just don't include it. So it's something that like, it seems to be that you were sick, they just didn't say it in game. But then you also have the issue of pale blood, because...
Yeah, because assumably our character asked about it.
Yeah, because the first line in the game is, oh yes, pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. So we're the ones that said, like, hey, I'm looking for this pale blood. Do you have it in Yharnam? And he's like, it's the right if you want to look for it. We probably got something. And
we probably got some pale blood.
And if you look at like when you wake up, the bandages and things that you're wearing, if you inspect those, it says like, yeah, this probably is something that you would wear if you were a foreigner, but no one knows because you don't have a memory anymore. So you came to Yharnam and you remember asking about pale blood, but nothing else, and everything else is like a blur, and you don't actually remember where you came from. And then you have the Handwritten Scroll. The Handwritten Scroll, the Japanese, again, it says like it's like described as it's like note in a person's handwriting, meaning it's a distinct handwriting that you recognize, doesn't say whose. So the implication very strongly is that is yours. Like you came with that note that says on
because
it. Yeah.
The note doesn't make any other sense. Like it doesn't make sense. Maybe if the blood minister left it, but even then.
Well, but again, like the blood minister doesn't know what pale blood is. Yeah. So the idea is also, either you wrote that to yourself or someone wrote it and gave it to you. And you just don't remember. You recognize the handwriting, but that's all. So we apparently also came to Yharnam looking for pale blood. but it's not clear why. And it's not clear how much we
Yeah.
know about it, because it just says seek pale blood to transcend the hunt.
And as we go through the game, we kill beasts. Okay, so here's one. The reason we don't go blood drunk is because we have the doll
Yes.
who's able to eliminate that
Yeah.
whole business.
Yeah. So this is, again, going back to translation stuff, and this is also another thing that was added really late, but it works really well. Is that you don't level up from blood, you level up from what's called the echoes of blood. And okay, what the fuck is an echo of blood? So the echo of blood is a translation of a term that we don't have in English. You can see why they're going with echo of blood, because they're trying to go for something more poetic. But it's like the left behind sort of like longing for, or like need, or like feelings toward blood.
Almost
So,
a dying will?
The thing is, you could call it like, it's tempting to call it bloodlust, but that's way too strong a term. But the idea is like, as you're going around Yharnam and hacking stuff up and absorbing not pale blood, like cold blood and stuff, it's giving you this, like, it's leaving this taste with you of like, ooh, this blood's actually kind of all right. I'm liking this.
Yeah.
And then what the doll is doing is she is removing from you the echoes of blood, and she is making you stronger. That's what I will take the echoes of blood and transform them into your strength. So throughout that night, even though you are absorbing all of this like taste for blood and like, I like this stuff, the doll is taking it out of you, and she's taking from you this thing that is making you weaker and turning into something that makes you stronger. So that's why we don't go blood drunk. But if you look at other characters, like Eileen has been to the dream. There's like no question about it. She talks about it. Eileen, if she hunts too much, she will go blood drunk during our game. If she kills the bloody. Presumably what happens is, if you don't intervene, she kills Henrik. As a result of killing Henrik, she tips over because she's got like more blood echoes in her. Gascoigne, blood drunk. Alfred, like, kind of goes blood. He goes a little crazy. It's not clear, like,
He just goes insane.
yeah, but again, like, it's not clear if like, it's not clear. He was always going to like murder Annalise horribly, but it's not clear that like, it's possible that the act of killing her sort of tipped him over into that.
Yeah. She's very special, so I imagine that like the corrupted blood within her probably
yeah, and like when
it.
you fight him, he's like, "You're spilling my blood!" He's like yelling at you, and all these characters who go blood drunk, the idea being that like the doll is sort of like removing from them the lust for blood, and that seems to be a feature of when she was initially built. She wasn't built to she wasn't built as like a weird humanoid blood purifier. She was built, it says, because the person who built her, who we now understand to be Gurman, built her because he felt lonely. He felt this longing, and he needed a friend. He needed someone who was with him to keep him sane. So you can see that, like, okay, that's now that she's in the dream and she's kind of become sentient, that transfers from being like, I need this doll around to keep me stable, to the doll is actually alive now. And she is literally keeping people stable by removing this taint from their body. Yeah.
I really like, even though it probably wasn't designed that way, Eileen, she has like a plague doctor's beak mask with like incense in the bottom, and every single part of her body is covered up, so it's like, oh yeah, probably getting a bit of blood on you, because when you kill enemies, it splatters all over the place. It's not just that you absorb blood echoes, it's that you literally are covered in the thing, and that's what feeding your blood, not bloodlust, your will for blood, or whatever it is.
Canehurst says that as well, that like the armor in Canehurst is very thin. It's like they describe it as being, it's almost like tissue paper, even though it's metal. But the purpose of it is to repel blood. It's not necessarily to actually offer you physical defense. It's that, tainted blood, if it touches you, will scour off the armor. Yeah. So
Tainted blood.
we did this last time. There's the last AMA we spontaneously sung Tainted Blood.
Is that a real song?
It's Tainted Love is a real song.
Oh.
We just replaced one of the words. This tainted
That's from
blood
Fallout.
No, it's a little,
I think.
it's a little too late for Fallout. We're talking like 80s. Classic by Soft Cell.
Oh no, it's there's a cover of it in one of the BioShocks.
Yeah, that
That's what I'm
probably.
thinking. Okay, so we go to the Hunter's Dream. We don't get blood drawn.
Yeah.
Go searching for pale blood. Eventually, it leads us to the Nightmare of Menses. Why does silencing the newborn's cry end the hunt?
Very good question.
Explain this to me.
Very good question. No one really knows. What basically, I think the idea is that once Rom dies and the Red Moon descends, it becomes like, okay, now things have gotten serious. So the goal is no longer to just mop up beasts. It's actually to like get to the core of it. That's why you get like the note says, was it like stop the source of the spreading scourge of beasts? And
yeah, something.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the source of the spreading scourge of beasts is the Menses Ritual. Because what's happening is that Menses are using Murgo to, like, bait a Great One. So once you interrupt the ritual, get rid of Mikolash, get Murgo back from the Wet Nurse, Queen Yarnum of the City of Yarn, Queen Yarnum will just go, thank you, and she will disappear. And that seems to be like what ends the Scourge of Beasts. Like when you wake up the following morning, assuming you do, the Red Moon's gone. It's gone in the dream and it's gone in Yarnum.
But
So
Richie,
yes, Sin.
sorry, I'll say it again. But Richie,
Yes, Sin.
what
Is this
about
about Reborn?
No.
Good.
What about the Wrath of Cause?
I was gonna
That's a
say,
separate issue.
does this all connect?
Yarnum has a lot of issues.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask with Mirko specifically and Queen Yarnum, like she says, thank you. Cause, assumably, the curse probably ends because you managed to silence the orphan's wrath.
Yes.
You managed to silence Mirko's crying.
Yeah.
It's the same idea, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it goes back to that bond between mother and child.
Yes. Yeah. That's basically, yeah. The whole game is... We've talked about it before, and basically the whole game is a series of male academics encountering women and not understanding them. And then trying to understand them by cutting them open, and then realizing that they still don't understand them. And then just sort of like giving up and saying, okay, I'll play along with what you want, essentially. That's the only way I can move forward, is to sort of like actually empathize to a degree with what you want.
Yeah. At the end, we managed to consume the madness of the third courts.
Yeah.
The third courts, they're not umbilical courts.
No.
They are a precursor, except if you're playing in Japan, in which case the umbilical cord comes first.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing about them is they're called an umbilical cord, but if you look at how it's written, it's like... I think the English does it with quotation marks, but in Japanese it uses those hooked brackets that are like the equivalent of writing something in quotation marks. So it's an umbilical... I'm doing like the Dr. Evil quotes here. It's an umbilical cord, but that's not literally what it is. That's what they're calling it, because it functions like an umbilical cord in that it links the parent and the child. So if you have like the Orphan of Cause's umbilical cord, it's a weird... It looks like a cochlea. It doesn't look like an umbilical cord at all. It's just like a weird, like, spiral hunk of flesh. But what that does is that's what connects the Orphan of Cause to Cause, even now that both of them are gone. It's like this... It's this, like, reification of the connection. They've made it physical. So if you have that, then you can use that to try and talk to Cause. And that's how they all work. So when we take these cords into ourselves, or we don't even take them into ourselves, it's not clear what we actually do with them. They presumably aren't single use, because we can pick them up off people who've used them before. I think it's just a gameplay consideration that you get to use them once. But yeah, like when we're using that, we're like basically using this thing to reach out to Cause, or whoever is the child of the Great One we got that cord from. And it's like we've established a link, because they're reaching down to us, and it's like the creation of man, the Da Vinci thing was sort of like reaching up and touching like this. I realize I'm not on camera, but just reaching up and touching like this.
I'd like listeners to know that he did not actually illustrate how Da Vinci, the creation of man, works. They're just like this.
Yeah. I'm using all my fingers because I'm a little tiny picture in the corner. It's this. So, yeah,
He interlocked all of his hand.
It's this.
I'll do some shitty graphics to illustrate.
It's this. So yeah, we're doing that. We're doing that with the Great Ones. That's why the chords by the end of the game, we're so in touch that we have the ability to transcend. But that's why we need 3 of them, because 1 is not enough.
And that's also goes back to that Cause is probably alive in some form, in that the chord still works. You're still reaching out to Cause.
Yeah, well, Cause is Cause is still alive in some form, because when you defeat the orphan, the curse is lifted. So Cause, again, it's working on the logic of a ghost story, in that this terrible thing happened and we're setting it right, and that sort of calms the angry specters. So Cause's ghosts survive. We're talking about names, actually, that Cause's name in Japanese is it's Gos, but it's with ghosts, ghosts, a big throaty ghost. So she's meant she is a ghost. That's the idea. She's the ghost that is haunting you. And if we calm the ghost, then we calm everything else. So she died, but her spirit is. Well, it's hard to say because they're all they're super beings who are beyond comprehension. And we're going back to Lovecraft, the whole idea of that is not dead which can eternal lie. So Cos isn't really dead, and maybe Rom is dead, but Rom is in the dream, and Mikolash is dead, but Mikolash is in the dream.
Well, I don't think Mikolash can eternally lie.
No.
You know what I would have thought was cool? If after you kill Mikolash, if you went back to the Advent Plaza, if his mummy was it would have moved a little bit, it's just on the ground, crawling, but it died on the way out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
He had to go back into that horrible body of his.
Yeah.
That would have been cool.
Super cool.
So I don't know. We inherit the madness of the courts. We use the courts to call to the Great Ones, whatever it is. And it's kind of funny because Annalise's court is a court we had already used. But we are able to reject Gurman, and then we fight the Moon Presence. And the Moon Presence... So... It's not explained exactly how we repel the Moon Presence. Well, it's just at a certain point, we have enough celestial protection.
Well, all right. What it looks like, and this is important because when you beat the game, you go into New Game Plus, and you see the same thing happen again. You could go through the intro again. And I think this is why it's important that the Seek Pale Blood note is there, because it's to if you just got that ending, and then you go into the next game cycle and you see next to you Seek Pale Blood to transcend the hunt, it's oh, that's what I did. I transcended the hunt and I found the Pale Blood, and the Pale Blood was the sky that let me contact the Moon Presence. Okay. So the other instance in which we see you repelling something is the intro. It's when the messengers crawl on you, and then you see the sort of it's clearly metaphorical. The sort of the beast made of blood is reaching out to touch you. And then when it touches you, it suddenly is pushed back by something and catches fire and melts. Which is presumably this is us inoculating you. You have the protection of the doll, protection of the message is going to stop you going blood drunk.
I always read that as this is beasthood creeping up on you, and then maybe Flora or whatever touches you, connects you to the dream, and then it's able to push the beasthood
it's
back.
Right. You see it right before the messengers crawl on you. So it's clearly the messengers did it. So it's the same thing. The Moon Presence reaches out to grab you. If you got the cords, it's suddenly repelled in the same way. It's what? So my take on it is, if you don't have the cords, she just enslaves you. She just wraps herself around you, and the next thing you see, you've taken Gurman's place. But I think the idea is that she tries to wrap herself around you, she's pushed back, and she realizes that you are becoming as powerful as she is.
Yeah, she's
and that's... Yeah.
She's Nani?
Nani? She does
Yeah.
that, and that's why she's trying to kill you, because she's like, oh shit, like this thing is stronger than I am. That's why she's frantically trying to kill you. And I think like a lot of people were assuming that killing the moon presence is actually what makes you change into a Great One. I think in line with the note that says hunt the Great Ones, it's in Bergenworth. But like, I think honestly you were on the way to becoming a Great One. That's why she freaks out. And killing her is just
it's
self-defense.
just like, however long you play Bloodborne, it's still just set during one night. However many times you have played after using the cords, you still just transform after killing. It's just like the story needs to take place somehow.
So you end up, I think, and like when you are transformed, it's not clear how long it's been. It's not clear exactly what happened, and like how does time even work in a dream? Who knows? But like, I think, and you become a baby Great One. You don't like turn into like a full blown like squid monster. Really, you're like the size of like this bottle that I'm holding up now. That's not going to be in the chat.
No.
But like, I think the idea is you're just too powerful to control at this point, and that's why she's trying to kill you. And the transformation sort of maybe would have happened anyway, because you're so close.
That's
to
really
it.
That's really interesting. The idea that in the beginning you repel the beast, in the end you repel a Great One. And that never connected with me before.
I had a vision.
You haven't played it 70 times in a row.
Richie.
Yes, and
Acer, I had a vision.
Okay.
In Bloodborne 2, no matter where you are in the game, after 100 hours of gameplay, you turn into a little baby Great One slug. Just plop.
Thank you, Sin.
Anytime.
Thank you, Sin. Good contribution. So we become a Great One. What happens? Like, what are the ramifications of this?
Well, what it says is that you become a Great One, lifting humanity into its next childhood. Which is, again, going back to the cycle idea that it'll just happen again. So, like, we talked a little about Lauren and Cos and stuff, but the implication, which I say a lot, the implication of the way the DLC is constructed and how it interfaces with the base game is that Lauren happened before Yharnam. It was like the previous time this happened was this place called Lauren. And Cos was the Great One created when that happened. So we are just like becoming the next Cos. So in however long it will be, like 1,000 years or 500 years or whatever, archaeologists will stumble on the ruins of Yharnam. They'll wonder what the hell happened here. They'll start probing, and they'll find like the remnants of what we did, and we will be the Cos. We will be like the Great One that they encounter.
Maybe even, maybe even humans will continue building on top of Yharnam.
Yeah.
Forget that they were ever humans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, like the hunter's nightmare that will become the next time this happens. That will still be there, and it will be the equivalent of the Nightmare Frontier. It will be like, we found this place. Yes. What is it? They'll mess around. They might kill us, and then we'll curse them, and then they'll end up with their own. And this will just happen over and over and over again.
The hunter is cast theory confirmed.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right then. I'd like to talk a bit about the ramifications of the ending before we end this. So the idea seems to be, because this is a very Eastern game, that you are going through, like, it is this cycle until you finally are able to sort of transcend. That's a very Buddhist idea. You talked once about how the doll also fits that mold, because she manages. So you manage to leave behind everything that made you, and you're able to sort of move on to this next stage of being. Yeah. Whereas the doll is able to also, the doll as like a component of Maria. Maria throws away the Rakuyo. She changes her ways. She becomes a kinder person. that kind person aspect of her gets removed from her
Lives on, yeah.
and is the
Yeah, because
doll.
when Maria finally like is sort of calmed and passes on, the doll says like I felt something and she can't explain it. She says it was like being liberated from shackles. Because
Mhm.
the thing about Maria is that like when we encounter Maria, because it's a dream, we encounter like a version of Maria that is like Hunter Maria, where she's got like her transforming Rakuyo thing, and she's got like the leather get up and everything, and she's like she's like stabbing herself and throwing like gouts of blood at you and everything. But that's not what Maria was actually like at the end of her life. That's like Maria is like that in the dream because it is what she feared being. It's what she's frightened of, and
It's like how Ludwig is a beast,
yeah,
like how Lawrence is a
yeah,
beast.
yeah. Because if you listen to like how other people talk about Maria, they're like she's like this calming presence. She's like, I need you to come to me and calm me, like where I hold my hand, please. They don't talk about her as that person, and like even if you look at how Maria is talked about in text, it's like she threw her sword away because she didn't want to be that person anymore. So you can see like she is struggling with that, like that murderous person trying to get that out of her, and she's trying very hard to be like the doll, essentially.
Yeah, and it's very. It should be noted that she is anchored to a point in like the nightmare is a linear walk back in time.
Yeah.
She is anchored to a point prior to having made the transition fully.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's kind of like the nightmare. Again, it punishes Lawrence by stealing his mind. It punishes Ludwig by making him a beast. It punishes Maria by anchoring her to this person which
yeah,
she doesn't want to
yeah,
be.
yeah. And like I get why like some people are reticent to look at it that way, because Hunter Maria is pretty cool. She's like a
Yeah,
really she
Yeah.
looks cool. She does all these like spinny things, and she can like set her blood on fire and like teleport around the room and stuff. But like if you look at Maria's just biography and how she's talked about, like she was trying to not be that because that person did so much damage. And she's trying to be like a good person. She's trying to be a kind person and a supportive person. So even though like the doll is not Maria's spirit stuck inside a doll, it's like
mm.
something of Maria is in there, and basically Maria's able to leave all of like the hunter part of her behind and just be like not become that person, but for just that aspect of her to live on as something else. Yeah.
And that's really beautiful
Yeah.
because
And
it's kind of
yeah.
like
We live on as something else as well, because we live on as a great one. So the final shot of that is it's two beings who manage to transcend their origins, sort of looking out onto the new world, which is a good ending. Yeah.
So it's not just a gothic action game about killing snail monsters and
Well,
werewolves.
what I mean, I don't want to go off on another tangent, but what I find interesting is that like it initially presents itself as a gothic thing, then it goes off
Yeah.
into this Lovecraftian thing that recontextualizes it all. But then ultimately the logic at the end of the story is still like gothic horror logic, because you still have to like quiet like the mother who went through all of these like traumas and fix up history and stuff. And the great ones, even though there's that very, very clear like these things are just straight up like Lovecraftian monsters, what makes them distinct and what actually allows the story to progress is that they have comprehensible human motives and human emotions that you can connect to. Like they want children, they're like in mourning, and they're like they suffer grief and things, and that's what makes them comprehensible to people. It's why you can make pacts with them and things. So ultimately, like it does a big loop. It starts gothic and then it goes weird, and then the ending is still, right the wrong that was done to Queen Yarnum and to Cos. And then once that's done, the ghosts fade away, which is very, like, that's not really Lovecraftian. That's just back to Gothic again.
Yeah. Well, Sin, Richie, it's nice having you.
It's nice having you.
I've been on your channel so very often. Now you finally get to be on mine.
Aw.
We run our channel discussing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, though.
I like JoJo's Bizarre
Yeah.
Adventure.
Yeah.
We'll do another one of those in like a few years.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, where can people find you guys? Just let you leave all of your plugs.
Sin can do this part. She's the one who does.
Okay. So people can find Richie and I on youtube.com/SinclairLore, home of the best Reborn content in the world. We also do some Soulsborne stuff once in a while.
Yeah.
Once in a while.
Yeah.
You have like 20 episodes or something about the nodes of Bloodborne.
Yeah, Asa was not joking. There is a separate between 20 and 30-minute video for every single note that you find on the ground. Answering questions such as who left it, what were they trying to communicate.
If people have any more questions about Bloodborne, they could reach out to you, I imagine, like on Twitter or whatever. But also, you probably have done like a really extensive video on every topic.
Yeah,
so
well,
this
we
is
haven't
interesting.
done Doors of Bloodborne yet,
But
which
that's
is
coming
Sin's upcoming project is to do one on every door.
An interesting thing happened today. I noticed there's a button on YouTube that says play all. If you click it, and once you click it, it sort of compiles, I guess, everything that's public on your channel into a giant playlist that you can just listen to. And we have over 1,500 videos.
Jesus.
I did not know that. Most of them
Well,
are about
I
Bloodborne.
didn't know, but it feels like we do, so...
Yeah.
So this is like, you have like Vardy who's doing one video a month, but it's like it's got all that like production values and it's like really like focused on like one thing. And then with us it's just like let's have half an hour and then record a note. So just that.
It's just like, hey, let's talk about the lock shield.
For an
and
hour.
you explain the lock shield and no, you talked about it for 5 minutes. Then you just did like an hour of nothing.
That was the beginning of like people, because when we started doing this, it was just like a question, kind of like what we're doing with you now, or it was a question and answer thing of like, what do you think about this? I think it's this thing. And then what happened was just like, not even gradually, but like quite quickly, people just liked the asides where we would argue with each other. About, like, and like Sin would like get mad and leave and go make a coffee or something. And then people just started liking that.
Which was the episode with was it like Deep Sea where was it psychosomatic scurvy?
Oh, I don't remember the genesis of psychosomatic.
It was either Deep Sea or Great Lake.
It was one of them.
It was one of those.
Because we also did Runes
people
of
need
Bloodborne.
to.
Of course we did.
Yeah, people need to find that specific episode because that's, I think, the funniest bit you guys ever did.
Everything is entirely scripted, by the way.
Oh yeah.
That's the best part.
Totally.
People do think this is scripted, and I'm just like, I am offended by the notion that I would sit down and actually write this out. Like, no, this is clearly just two people arguing in the middle of the night.
But also, like, surely the writing would get better over time.
Shade!
Oh, like, we are just like... Oh.
I'm so looking
The
forward
best part is
to...
there's people who are like, wow, like, I used to listen to them all the time, but lately, like, they just seem disillusioned. Like, Bloodborne is 6 years old. Like, there's not... I don't know if you want us to sit there and just repeat the story about Eileen over and over again, but eventually it's gonna become this. Like, no one else is doing regular Bloodborne content. There isn't any. It's just us, and so it has to be this, because I don't know what you want to do. I don't know if you want us to do, like, rediscover the lore of Bloodborne, because that's not going to work. It's got to be Doors of Bloodborne. It's got to be Runes of Bloodborne. It's got to be Tyra Banks. It's got to be Willem talking to a slug.
I think it really hurt you guys psychologically that Elden Ring got pushed back. You needed that game. I highly recommend people go watch your channel. Excellent stuff. And I'm very thankful, first of all, to all the help you gave me during the Bloodborne commentary. If I got anything wrong, and having talked to you now, I've noticed like 2 or 3 things I got wrong. People are going to come after you.
Good. Yeah. So like when you said, where can people find you on social media? And I said nothing. That's why. Because I endured several years of, well, actually, until I just hid behind Sin. So you can find me on Discord, and that's all.
Thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you too.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having us on, Acer.
We're reflexively waving even though we're not on camera.
Do you want like multiple
Yay.
takes? Like, thank you for having us on. Thanks for having us on.
I'm not using
All right,
any
I'll
of
press
those.
stop now.
Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood ministration. You need only unravel its mystery.